Welcome to the Effortless Mindfulness Podcast. I'm Loch Kelly, and here I share talks and deep dialogues with leading experts in the field of meditation, psychology, and neuroscience. Together we'll explore how everyday people like you and me can live an awakened life of clarity and compassion. You'll also find micro meditations in every podcast episode. If you want to try more of these, you can go to mindfulglimpses.com to download the new app to experience immediate benefits, because the love and peace we're all seeking is already here, anywhere, anytime. Enjoy. I have the pleasure of welcoming Terry Real. Hey, Terry.
Hi, Locke. How you doing, man?
Good. Great to be here with you and see you again so soon.
Yeah, the last time we saw each other was in hot, sunny Costa Rica. Now I'm in Boston. It's cold and rainy, and we're wearing clothes. So
Yes. That's right. So this is great. Vivek Murthy, who's the
yes,
Surgeon General, just today declared that loneliness is a epidemic. There's an epidemic of loneliness and isolation affecting our country, and he started talking about that. So certainly we can bring that into our conversation. I know we want to, maybe you want to comment on that to begin.
I do actually, Dr. Murthy. I cite him a fair amount in my my last book. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Here, I'll give you this copy.
It's the one called Us.
Yeah, it's called Us.
Yeah.
Getting past you and me to build a more loving relationship. And it is about the healing power of relationship. And I do go into what I call the toxic culture of individualism and of patriarchy in the West. And I cite Murthy's wonderful book, by the way, called Together, and his research. He couldn't do a blurb. He couldn't do an endorsement because he was the Surgeon General of the U.S. But I know his work, and it's obviously true. I mean, yeah. Let's start there. Look, maybe your viewers and listeners already know this, but the name of my the therapy that I've created is Relational Life Therapy. The name of my institute is Relational Life Institute, and guess what? I believe in living a relational life. What do I mean by that? I mean a life of authentic connection to ourselves, first of all, our wants and needs, our feelings, our physical sensations. You know as well as I that trauma disrupts our connection. And in my work over 40 years, my first book about boyhood and manhood, called I Don't Want to Talk About It, patriarchy disrupts connection. That's what it does. And for example, the way we quote unquote turn boys into men in our culture, and it's still true to this day, is through disconnection from their vulnerabilities, their hearts from others. And one of the things I say is that the cost of disconnection in childhood is disconnection as an adult, and disconnection will kill you. That Murthy cites research. The lack of intimate connection is as bad for our physical health as smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. That's the equivalent. So I start off by saying we human beings are born to be connected. That's our birthright. That's what makes us happy, and it's the restoration of that connection to ourselves, to others, to other races, to society, to nature, and ultimately to spirit. which is the cure.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and there's so much that we can get into today, but yeah, it's interesting because certainly many people who start with meditation start by going off by themselves. So there's some sense that we starting by ourselves and then maybe connecting to some greater consciousness or greater than ourselves. But then some people make that definition of spirituality as if I'm going off to do my spirituality, you do your spirituality. And it's so important, to really talk about relationship as connection, just like the connection to ourselves, the connection to something greater than ourselves or our consciousness at its subtlest dimension, and then to each other, and then certainly to our most intimate partners, and what happens there when we have love and that gets disrupted.
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts about that. I have a very checkered spiritual career, as so many of us. I've been meditating for close to 50 years now, with in various schools, and for about 7 years, I sat with a Zen teacher, and it was very American. I'd meet with him for an hour. We'd talk for 15 minutes about my life, and then we'd sit together, which was amazing, like plugging into a wall socket, sitting with this guy. But when we talked about my life, I would say to him, so blah, 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 blah. What do you think about that from a Zen perspective? And he would say, I think you need to be intimate with it. Okay, well, blah, blah, blah. What do you think about this? And he would say, I think you need to really get to know it. And it was like the same damn thing every time, which is be with what is.
Yeah.
And that's called intimacy. He
Yeah.
also used to say that he believed in the West, our dharma is in our relationships, our cutting edge is our relationships. And my wife, Belinda, and I are fond of smiling at each other from time to time and saying, hey, I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to work on myself, you know.
Yes.
But I talk, as you know,
Yeah.
I talk about what I call relational mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Get your attentional practice off the pillow, and it's one thing to be spiritual, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, when you're in a 7-day retreat. It's another thing to be spiritual when you're in your living room and your
Right.
partner's screaming at you because they're
Yes.
so pissed off at you. Be
Yes.
spiritual in that moment there,
Yes.
uh, and um, and that's what my work is about. I call it relational mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about what I call remembering love. It's coming out of the reactive parts of us. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that,
Yeah.
and getting centered in the part of us that can remember the relationship, which is only the prefrontal part only the developed part of the brain can remember that.
Mm.
Remember that the person you're speaking to is someone you care about, that you live with them. It's in your interest to make things work, and that you love them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not there, if you're not shifting out of the reactive part of your brain, trauma flooded, to the centered part of your being, all bets are off. You're not
Yeah.
going to. Yeah, I used to go around the country doing workshops, and my favorite slide was other workshops teach you skills. We deal with the part of you that won't use them.
That's good.
So the first skill, the skill,
Yeah.
is to get centered in the part of you that wants to use skills to begin with.
Yes.
And I call that the wise adult part
Mm.
of us. And it's distinct from either the wounded child part of us, which is just flooded with the experience of trauma, very young, or the very important part I call, following my mentor, Pia Melody, the
Right.
adaptive child part of us.
Right.
And that's the part of us that coped, that learned, that did what we needed to do to get by. It's knee jerk, it's
Mm-hmm.
automatic. It feels like you've got to do this or the world's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the wise adult
Right.
part. It repeats the
Yeah.
same damn thing over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. That certainly people know the traumatized child, and we'll talk more about that. But that adaptive child is really mostly what we call me. In other words,
That's right.
it's actually, we think it's an adult. We think it's actually a rational, smart one that begins the conversation with our partner that says, can we talk about something here? And we think, oh, I must be in my wise adult. But it may be have an agenda and being ready to list its reasons to have its way. But it seems like an adult. And then the wise adult is that frontal cortex, but something greater too. It's some
It can
other,
be greater.
yeah, right?
That's right. That's right. I agree with Pia that getting centered in the wise adult part of us is a spiritual experience. It is healing.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's the same attentional practice as you would do in your daily meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an action. It's in the moment. And by the way, for those of us who can be quite reactive, me included, I'm a big fan of breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Set it up in advance, but if you get flooded, you may not be able to control yourself if you stand there, but you can turn heel and walk away. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of timeouts. I'm a big fan of, hey, I'm going to take a walk around the block.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk again in 20 minutes, and do the re-regulation work of breathing, getting centered. Maybe talk to that little boy or girl, put them on your lap. But do what you need to do to get out of the reactive part of your neurobiology and in the wiser part that really wants to make things.
Mm-hmm.
The first step in making things better between you and your partner is getting in the part of you that wants to make them better.
Right.
Because there are other parts of us that don't really give a damn.
Yeah. So that, many people listening, relationship is where the rubber hits the road. It's kind of the advanced spiritual practice because you can sit on a meditation cushion or at a retreat and you can start to feel those traumatized parts come up. Although even the research shows that if somebody goes and does a 5-day retreat, having never done one before, when you calm the brain, uh, this is research by Willoughby Britton at Brown, and then you deconstruct the small self or the adaptive child, the 40% of people get flooded by childhood or unconscious contents and end up not feeling like they can handle it because they don't know what a wise adult is that can be with their own parts. And then those who often meditate will use a kind of meditation that kind of represses contents of consciousness and go into what's often called, one of my Tibetan teachers called stupid meditation, which is basically just calm practice that then you walk out of there and you feel good and you go up to somebody you love, who you, let's say you're in a relationship and you love them and you love them. Now you feel calmer. Now you walk in and some small thing floods you. I like floods better than triggers, almost like something, floods you. And all of a sudden, whatever that was that you gained, if you haven't dealt with that trauma, I mean, we're all like just amazed and surprised when that happens. So talk a little about, you know, to normalize that, right? As that's
Yeah.
happens. The quote from the Zen tradition is, if you want to know if your teacher is awake, ask their partner.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah, well, nobody could get to me like Belinda. I mean,
Okay.
it's just that's what she's here on earth to do. And to give you some idea of how sick and disturbed that she thinks the same thing of me. A wonderful me. I don't know how she could think that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I call this put your spiritual practice in the paycheck. I mean, live it.
Yeah.
And we live it in our relationships. People go off and do a meditation retreat. People go off and do deep trauma work, inner child work.
Mm-hmm.
People go off and do men's groups and open their hearts to a bunch of guys. And then they go home and they're the same jerks they were before they did all of that. You have to learn to live it. And so it does help, I believe, to, well, two things. One is I'm different from a lot of other trauma work. I do trauma work in couples therapy with the partner sitting next to you. It's beautiful to do that. By and large, a few contraindications, but by and large, it opens the heart of the other person watching. But the work I do is not release work. It's not like IFS unburdening or other, a lot of catharsis in traditional therapy. It's relational. It's bringing the adult, wise part of you into relationship with that adaptive child and that wounded child over and over and over again. You do it in a big way in the therapy office, but that's really the preamble to doing it every day in your life. I like to say when an inner child kicks up, you put them on your lap, you put your arms around them, you hear them out, and you take their sticky hands off the steering wheel. They're not driving the bus, you are. So the first skill, which the revolution is, it can be cultivated, it can be taught and strengthened, is to bring, when you're in that reactive part of yourself, to breathe yourself into center, bring yourself into that wiser part, and tend to that upset inside of you. I like to say maturity comes when we take care of our inner children and don't foist them off on our partners to take care of. And the inner child is just a metaphor for a traumatized, an early fixed. We would have called it arrested development in an earlier days. Just the you that's fixed at an early. Can I give you an example of what I mean?
Please, please. Yeah.
Enough blather. It's time for a story. This is my favorite story these days. It's an absolutely true story about what relational mindfulness really looks like. So I had a couple on the brink of divorce. That's my specialty. Couples on the brink that no one else has been able to help. And the issue was he's a liar. He lies about everything. She said, ask him what kind of shoes he has on, and he'll say they're not really shoes, they're sneakers, just to stick it to you. And for the therapist listening, he was one of these guys. I say to him, "The sky is blue," and he goes, "Well, he's not going to give it to me." So, in relational life therapy, we teach students to quickly identify the person's relational stance, the thing they keep doing over and over again that's blowing their foot off. And between the report of the wife and watching him with me, it wasn't hard to figure out he was a champion evader. This guy really knew how to not be anywhere. So I'm always thinking relationally. The adaptive child, once we get it, what were you adapting to? And that's a relationship. Who were you adapting to? So I ask a question which may seem, inspired, but it's really fallen off a log when you think relationally. I said, who tried to control you growing up? Right? I have a saying, show me the thumbprint, I'll tell you about the thumb. The bigger the evasion, the bigger the control. So who tried? Yeah, his dad, sure enough, a military man, how he sat, how he ate, his friends, his clothes, his courses. And I said, how did you cope with this controlling man? And he smiled, which is good. That's the smile of resistance. That's life. He smiles and he goes, I lied.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. My dad hated Henry. I couldn't play with Henry. I'd go play with Henry and tell him I'd been playing with John. I lied. Smart boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach my students, always be respectful of the exquisite intelligence of the adaptive child. You did exactly what you needed to do back then to preserve yourself. Well done. But adaptive then, maladaptive
Right.
now. You're
Yeah.
not that 4-year-old. Your wife is not your dad. So true story, Locke. They come in 2 weeks later, hand in hand. They go, "We're done,"
Yeah.
and they were.
Wow.
I said, "Okay, tell me the tale. There's a tale here." Over the weekend, she sent him to the grocery store to get, say, 12 things. And true to form, he comes home with 11.
Mm.
The wife says, "Where's the pumpernickel?"
Right.
And I like listeners to feel this in their bodies.
Yeah.
He said, "Every nerve and muscle in my body was screaming to say they were out of the pumpernickel."
Mm.
And in this one moment, I thought of you. See, we can lend our
Right.
patience, our prefrontal cortex. I thought of you. I took a breath. I looked my wife in the eye and I said, "I forgot the pumpernickel."
Mm.
And she, this is true, she burst into tears.
Mm.
And she said, "I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years."
Right.
And he was done. And he was done. He hasn't lied since that moment.
Wow.
So that's
Yeah.
a moment of coming out of his adaptive child into his
Yeah.
wise adult.
Yeah. And I feel that it's such a great story. How that adaptive child is probably, I've seen you work with other people as well, and I've worked with people who are so smart, so accomplished, so in everything they do that they think that adaptive child is wise. They think, well, I'm the wise. I'm really wise. You see how wise I am. Like, but they don't get that the wisdom has vulnerability. That they think that adaptive child's eye view that becomes the patriarchy or the adult world tries to be right, tries to be smart, tries to be successful, tries to be and thinks that is the way to keep powering that up even more in a relationship. Well, I'm just trying to get it correct and tell you what's really, so that lending your support and then accessing that. So that point of wise adult that has the spirituality is the vulnerability, the humility, and the relief and the release and the connection to the loved one and the connection to the new view, the new you, right? So there's something really bigger than just the frontal cortex, right there. That's
That's right.
consciousness, right?
Yes, consciousness.
Yeah,
And for those of us for whom this speaks to, is help.
yeah,
There's benevolent support in
mm,
trying to reach beyond our. Um, I talk about the adaptive child having 5 losing strategies, and
hmm,
I'd like to name them for
yeah,
being right.
hmm.
I have a saying: you can be right or you can be married. What's more important to you? How many of us? We're going to settle this when we determine which of us is right and which of us is wrong. Good
Yeah,
luck with that. Controlling our partner,
mm,
which can be either overt and dominating, that's more male,
mhm,
or covert and codependent and enabling, that tends
right,
to be traditionally more feminine. But I'll be happy when you dot dot dot. Good luck with that.
right,
Unbridled self-expression, which therapy has been a major contributor to. I call it the barf bag approach to.
uh-huh,
Let me tell you exactly how miserable I am about you
right,
and what you did last week and 2 weeks ago and always and never. And
mm,
that is not a path to solving anything. Retaliation,
mm,
let me hurt you the way you hurt me,
right,
which again can be direct or more like passive aggressive withholding. And withdrawal, let me shut down. And you can withdraw and still be sitting 6 inches away from somebody. But these strategies, and it would be
right,
great, people listening could grab their phone or piece of paper and jot
right,
down
right,
their particular combination. being right, controlling your partner, unbridled venting, retaliation, or withdrawal. And none of these are going to get you more of what you want, and all
Right.
of them are the purview of your adaptive child. And as you said, Locke,
Mm.
the adaptive child part of you will be rewarded in this culture,
Yes, that's right.
but it'll make a hash of your personal life.
Yeah, it can work at work, but it doesn't work at home. It doesn't always work at work either, but depending on the culture. But it is that lack of understanding of the feeling of what a wise adult is as a cultural, you know, um, even definition. That there is that wise isn't just being smarter. That wise has that vulnerability and connection and surrender and resource to a kind of loving consciousness that's more mature but maybe more primary in terms of just being innocent.
Yeah, it is. But that's why I call it relational recovery.
Yeah,
It's not an addictions recovery, although that may be part of it. It's really recovering that state of relationality, which is
right.
our birthright, which is what we're
Yeah,
born for.
so that child has that innocent um openness that gets shut down, right, by trauma and then is it more like the teenage? Because I think Pia called it adaptive teen, right? So the
No,
or is
that's
that a
Marilyn Abrams, I think,
oh,
at
okay.
PCS. Yeah, she talked. But there are lots of these
Yeah,
systems.
yeah.
Dick Schwartz has the exiles and managers.
Mhm.
TA. Yeah, people talk about the sobbing child, the angry
Okay.
child, or the angry teen. I've worked with adapted children at 3 and 4.
Okay. Wow.
A woman told me a story about her mom who was utterly incompetent. The car went dead in the middle of a busy intersection. The mother just was sort of screaming and crying and holding onto the wheel. Cars were zipping by. She said, I got out of the car and found a few good, strong men, and we pulled the car off the side of the road. And my mother was still screaming in the middle of the
Mm.
car. I said, how old were you? You ready, Locke? She was
Yeah.
4.
Wow.
She had a 4-year-old adaptive child.
Yeah.
So some of these adaptions happen quickly, but you'll do okay in the world, but you won't feel good inside your skin, and you won't do well in your relationship.
Yeah. And yeah, that willingness to acknowledge these whatever you call them defensive parts, not even you talk about, which I think is an interesting topic, both shame based and grandiose. And a lot of people are talking about shame based. Maybe you say something also about that other.
Yeah, I think it's one of RLT's real contributions, if I
Okay.
may, if that's not
Mm.
too grandiose. But for 50 years, we've been focused on helping people come up from
Yeah.
shame, but we've done a terrible job of helping people come down from the one up of
Yeah.
grandiosity, superiority, contempt, anger,
Right.
control,
Right.
retaliation, entitlement.
Hmm.
And as a couples therapist, I got to tell you, that stuff is at least as damaging in relationships as shame is.
Yes.
Uh, so we have a million sayings in RLT, and one is we want the weak to stand up, we want the mighty to melt.
Mm. Beautiful.
But you have to come down from that one, and we most of all of us have both. We may
Yes.
ride more in one position or the other, but we have both, and we marry one or the other. So helping people come down from, for example, self-righteous indignation. Uh, a lot of people feel like self-righteous indignation is a perfectly fine thing to feel. But in fact, it's corrosive. There's a world of difference between I'm angry and you're an asshole. And people don't get that in this culture. And in psychotherapy, is fond of saying that grandiosity is always a defense against shame. The bully is really insecure. But that's not always true. Grandiosity can be an inheritance of what we call false empowerment, pumping up a child. A parent can pump up a child's grandiosity, and they grow up being a grandiose. In RLT, once we get the dysfunctional stance, we say, who did you see do this? Or who did it to you? Or who did you do it to and no one stopped you? That's grandiosity.
Right. Like a
Uh,
privileged position.
yeah, I had a guy in his 40s who came to me, wife referral. I have a lot of wife mandated referrals.
Yeah.
He came to me after he ripped his study to pieces, literally the couch, the bookcase, and who was the angry one in your family growing up? No one, me. What do you mean you? Well, I've been having temper tantrums since I've been 4 years old.
Oh.
Well, who stopped you? I mean, what were the consequences? How did your parents? He said, well, mostly they just gave me what I wanted.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, that's why you're still having them at 40.
Right.
So there's an interesting bit of research. Half of narcissists have inner shame. The other half just think they're better than you and me.
Right. So
So,
that's yeah.
so it's really important as we try and make these spiritual practices real in our lives
Mm-hmm.
that we get to know of the adaptive child parts of us. Do you ride in the one down? Do you ride in the one up?
Right.
And if you do, how to intervene, how to bring yourself up from shame, and how to breathe yourself down from that contempt or entitlement.
Yeah.
But the beauty is that these techniques can be taught and learned.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I know. And I know the first time I came to know of you was by one of my male clients coming in with your book many years ago when you first wrote, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And he said, well, this describes me. That male psychology, certainly culturally male. And, maybe you want to say something. I know you say in your book that relational life therapy teaches men, women, and non binary people. So I know there's talking about men, women, non binary, male, female, feminine, masculine is a big but culturally, there's ways to talk about it to say,
Yeah.
distinguish sexuality from gender identification from masculine, male, whatever but that just helped, just that frozen position that men certainly can get into where it's kind of a righteous, but it's a position of depression, of withdrawal. But yeah, maybe you want to say something about that.
Well, I talk about the normal traumatization of boyhood under patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and since you asked, let me say it. There are three rings of psychological patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Political patriarchy is just sexism. It's the oppression of women by men. But psychological patriarchy oppresses everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about three rings. The first ring is I call the Great Divide.
Mm.
Another great mentor of the wonderful feminist therapist Olga Silverstein called it the halving process, HALVING. You
Mm.
take the qualities of one whole human being, you draw a line down the middle, you go, these are masculine, these are feminine.
Right.
I think this is totally social. There is no such thing as the essential masculine or feminine. It's too varied. And we all know what goes where, what the qualities are. The second ring I call the dance of contempt, which is that quote unquote masculine qualities are exalted and quote unquote feminine are devalued. The essential relationship of masculine to feminine in our culture is contempt. What it means to be a man is to not be a girl, not be feminine, not be vulnerable. And the essence of traditional masculinity is invulnerability. The more invulnerable you are, the more manly you are. Which is a big conundrum for heterosexual couples, because across the board, women empowered historically in the workforce and in feminism are demanding more emotional connection from us guys than traditionally we're raised to deliver. In fact, it's literally in some cases beaten out of us. So there's that asymmetry, and then the third ring is kind of ugly. Is whoever is on the feminine side of the equation. Could be a codependent man, could be a boy in child abuse, has a profound impulse to protect the disowned fragility of the person on the masculine side of the equation, even while being hurt by that person. Think about childhood trauma. The child always wants to regulate the out of control parent and blame themselves. And that's patriarchy. The perpetrator is protected, and the victim loses empathy to themselves and becomes hyper empathic to the offender. And our work is to reverse all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And therapy has colluded with that.
Right.
By ignoring issues of grandiosity, therapy does not confront offensive
Right.
people.
Yes.
And in RLT, we do.
Yes. I noticed that. That's one of your famous, well, that you're willing. I know in my experience with individual therapy, I'd say 80 to 90% of people, male and female, who came into individual by choice were more, traumatized, shame-based, codependent style, and the grandiose would get dragged into couples therapy. But
Right.
if they came in because someone said, "Well, you need therapy," they'd come into therapy, and if I couldn't get them to acknowledge that they needed it, they were out the door in 1 or 2 sessions. So that, that opportunity, because those, cisgendered couples that have those roles dramatically, um, traditionally bound, couples therapy is just a beautiful place that they're in that room. You've got an hour and a half, and you're here. So you're just saying, well, let's go for the solution. Right. And
Yeah.
so say something
Well,
about that.
I
Yeah.
really specialize in couples therapy out of my work with men
Yeah.
because it became clear to me that the core wound for boys and men was disconnection, and
Mm.
the healing move is reconnection.
Yeah.
Not always true for girls and women. Girls and women, the
Mhm.
wound is often disempowerment, and the healing move is empowerment. But for boys and men, it's disconnection all the way.
Mm.
And what better place to reconnect them than in their flesh and blood relationships?
Right.
George Valiant, a great a psychiatrist now gone, used to say that this is way back when people smoked in public. He said there are two kinds of people in the world. There's a guy who walks in an elevator, gets claustrophobic, and turns green. There's a guy who walks in an elevator, lights up a big fat stogie, and everybody else turns green. And that's the difference between shame and grandiosity.
Mhm.
Shame-based people are in pain, and individual therapy is great. You teach them, you love them, they internalize that, they start loving them. It's fine. But you can love up a grandiose person until you're blue in the face, and that's not what's missing. What's missing is empathy for the other guys in the
Right.
elevator. So I started bringing the guys in the elevator into the therapy room with me
Right.
because it was infinitely more effective. And that's how I started focusing on the actual relational work.
Right.
Is really by wanting to help these depressed men.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I know one of the unique things about some spirituality we have in common, and particularly this, what I call effortless mindfulness, is this assumption that what we're seeking is inherent within us. And
Mm.
so when I hear you say that, that couple that was um, in that bind within, one session with, of him admitting that he didn't pick up, he forgot the pumpernickel, it's as if it's not like a skill he learned, but it's literally he accessed a natural dimension of connection that didn't require him to re-educate the same amount of time that he was uneducated. Can you say something about?
Yeah, in RLT, we set the bar high. We see people who make life-changing transformations. I'm not saying it's all,
Mm-hmm.
but you see people change behavior they've engaged in their whole lives
Right.
in one session, and then you need to like help them
Yeah.
deepen it and digest it and live it. But the heavy work is behind you, and once you, because the consciousness. In RLT, we talk about three phases of the work. The first I call waking up the client. And that's like the guy with the pumpernickel. He woke up. I don't have to lie. The second is trauma work, inner child work. Where, what were you adapting to? Where did this come from? And when we move out of those adaptations, we leave the relationships that they were forged in, and there's often grief and even survivor guilt in leaving behind the dysfunctional childhood you lived. And then the third is skills. I differ from a lot of trauma people. A lot of trauma people think if you remove the trauma, people will just know how to be intimate. But people need how to stand up for yourself and be loving at the same time. Who knows how to do that? Uh, how to listen without being defensive. How to keep your eye on the prize and go for peace instead of accuracy. So these are all skills. So I think it's a combination of the waking you up, going back into the early
Mm-hmm.
childhood and forming a relationship with those early parts of you, not releasing them so much, but putting your arms around them, and then arming the wise part of you with actual practical skills. I think it's a combination of those
Yeah.
three.
Yeah. But I think what I acknowledge as similar is the order of those three. Because in other
Uh,
words, if you try to teach the adaptive child skills, that if you go with that first, which a lot of other therapies or other
right.
spiritualities or just positive thinking and cognitive based therapy is just, well, teach the ego how to be a wise adult. It just like they just take the good parts, and
Yeah.
so waking you up to that natural, then you can learn, because you're right. Is that the order?
Yeah. If I may, my favorite rendering of
Mm.
RLT is actually Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so let me go through the three
Okay.
phases. You've got a guy who's like archetypally anti-relational, right? Bah
Right,
humbug.
right, right.
And he's an addict. He's a miser. He's self-medicating with money.
Uh-huh.
What we self-medicate is the pain of not being connected, by the
Yeah.
way. But okay, and then Christmas Eve comes. He's visited by three ghosts. The first is the ghost of Christmas future.
Mm.
That's the wake-up call.
Yeah.
Collision with negative consequence. He is visiting his own funeral,
Mm.
and everybody's delighted that the son of a gun is finally
Mhm.
dead. That's a wake up. The wake up call with my clients is this is what's going to happen to you if you keep
Right,
doing what you're doing.
right.
And then the ghost of Christmas past, he goes back to his miserable childhood and his trauma and where it comes
Mhm.
from. And then the ghost of Christmas present takes him to Tiny Tim at Bob Cratchit's house,
Right.
where he learns what a functional family looks like. So first the wake up call, then the trauma work,
Mhm.
and then skills. And he wakes up the next day, buys everybody turkeys, and he's a menschly human being. RLT in action.
Right. From being a turkey to buying turkeys. That's
There you go.
so yeah. So yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, say something else about the what people like mutual awakening, like a couple when you see how they can help each other. Certainly the first stage, as you say, is those three steps, but the skills of um, once they're starting to learn those skills, what are some of those skills that people long for? I think that daily intimacy. I know my wife Paige and I, during the pandemic, which was a time of great loneliness and separation for many, we actually became closer because we were
It's true. That's
that
not uncommon,
yeah. So it was
particularly if the kids are out of the house. Yeah.
just a time to spend more time together and build on those skills. And some of the hot buttons would be almost start to laugh because they almost were seen by the wise adults as absurd. Within the context, we could feel like something's building up here, like whoa, 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 oh, okay. and and so that how do people, that's the longing I hear, particularly from women. I want to have a mutual awakening with my partner. Now, what they really mean is what you just said. They need the first three. They need the trauma healing, they need the awakening, they need the trauma. Then they can start. But say something about that, what you see.
Well, the first thing I want to say is it's interesting. The relationship is the crucible in which you get to do your work.
Uh-huh.
I'm a firm. Everybody I work with lives this serenity prayer. You're in charge of you, and you have to let go of outcome. Tuesday, you're in your wise adult, and your partner's in. I'm going to make you a gay couple. Your partner's in his adaptive child, and when your partner's in their adaptive, you try a couple, three times, honey. Come on, I'm sorry. I didn't really. What you're thinking I meant is not what I meant.
Right.
You try and sort of help them right themselves. If after two or three times it's clear they're having none of it,
Mm.
they're stuck in the adaptive child part of it, let go.
Mm.
Take a break. I'm going to get a cup of tea. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Not a rupture, but a break.
Mm. Mm.
You always come back. But stop beating your head against the wall. A lot of us don't know how to do that, or it's too lonely to let go, and your partner's being a jerk. I
Mm.
call it micro disappointment.
Yeah.
This Thursday at 3 o'clock, you're not going to get it. And if I speak about relational integrity, if you stay seated in your wise adult, even when your partner's being an idiot, that's not a great day for them. It's a mixed day for the relationship. It's a great day for you. We all have to be able to hold our seat in the face of our partners disappointing us. So that's a skill to not always feel like you have to fix the relationship, but let it be. Having said that, yes, you can help each other. You can. Um, I say this to the people I work with. Belinda and I both come from violent, raging families. We raged horribly in the early years of our marriage. We don't anymore. And now, 99 out of 100 times, every once in a while we'll lose it, but we'll start to lose it. And one or the other will take a break. And 15, 20 minutes go by, and one or the other will come back. And we do take turns. It's not always one. And it sounds something like this. Hey, I don't want to fight. Do you want to fight? I really don't want to. What do you need, honey? And Belinda will say, well, you really were a jerk about blah, blah. Yeah, okay. I was. Well, what do you need? Well, you can apologize for blah, blah, blah. And she'll say, well, I'm really sorry for blah. Now, in a former day, I would have held out for all four blahs, but now I'll take the one. Good, great. That's fine. Want some tea? Great. Okay. And there we are. And what I teach people I work with is what I'm thinking in that moment. If I'm the one saying let's not fight, or she's saying let's not fight, and I get off my high horse, what I'm thinking about literally is how do I want to spend my evening? Do I want to spend my evening fighting with this mad woman? Or would I rather cuddle on the couch and watch TV or build a fire? And that's the wise adult. I call it keeping your eyes on the prize. Like, what am I about right now? What do I really want?
Right.
And that's staying awake. What do I
Yeah.
really want right
Yeah.
now? Like, let me just say this.
Yeah.
People always say relationships take work. Here's something I want your listeners to get. The work of a relationship is in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
just like the work of spirituality. In this moment, what's more important, proving I'm right or making
Right.
peace with my partner?
Right.
And that's the work. In this moment, where am I going to go?
Yeah. And as you say, it's about recovery or resilience, that if you do start to get flooded, then that happens until it doesn't, and it can even get a little, about to happen, and catching it wherever you catch it. And then say something about the feeling. So that thought is, do I want to have a nice evening? But say something about the feeling of the wise adult when you're in it and you have that space or that
Yeah, well,
self.
one of the things is the difference between me, or me versus you, survival.
Yeah.
That's that fight or flight that's part of our trauma, versus the spaciousness
Mm,
of the essence of individualism is I stand apart from nature. It's a
mm,
spiritual mistake.
mm,
And the essence of patriarchy is I stand above nature and I dominate it. I can control
mm,
it, whether that's my partner or my kids, my body, my thinking. And what I replace that with is what I call ecological wisdom,
mm,
ecological humility. Our relationships are our biospheres.
mhm,
We're not above them, we're in them, we breathe them.
mhm.
And you remember, look, I can indulge my temper over here, but I'll breathe that pollution in and my partner's withdrawal and unkindness over. We're an ecosystem, there's no escape. I'm not outside of it, I'm in it. And that's waking up from the
Yeah.
delusion of individualism. It is a spiritual
Yeah.
consciousness. I'm
Yeah.
in it. I'm not above it. It's in my interest to keep my biosphere clean and healthy. And it may not be as expansive as,
Mhm.
boundless dimensions, but it's more expansive than yelling at each other. You
Yeah.
know, I have these big burly guys who say, uh, well, why should I work so hard to please my wife? And I go, knock, knock, you live with her, okay?
Start very practically. Yeah. Yeah. I know that working together, the cognitive and the essence, the natural connection or the awake consciousness, I can start to feel with Paige, my partner, the inner child within her and the adaptive adult, and I can feel her wise adult. And it literally becomes like a tuning in and like a seeing, oh, and then seeing my own, oh, look at this whole play here. And it's so nice when you put it into three simple, you know,
Yeah,
dimensions. And then you can
yeah,
feel what I call feel see. You're like, and it's like multi-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, perception that is felt by the wise adult, that can see it, that can see, only the wise adult can feel all the dimensions in myself and in her, and then can respond rather than react.
yeah. Respond rather than react. And
Yeah.
and you ask how it feels. It feels spacious, as opposed to urgent, and
Yes.
and generous as opposed to compulsive.
Great. So wonderful, Terry. It's so wonderful to be with you. And I'd love you to, say a little more. You mentioned your book, and certainly, your relational therapy and both training and ability for people to find therapists. Yeah. If you could
Yeah, yeah,
say
all of the
something.
above.
Yeah.
If you are a mental health professional,
Yeah.
come to
Mhm.
relationallife.com, two L's, relationallife.com, one word, and look at all the trainings we're doing. If you're not a therapist, but what I call a normal person, just go to Terry Real. And I have online courses in basic relationship skills for everybody. So
Yeah.
come and learn how to do it. Um, have the humility of understanding that your mom and dad probably didn't teach you how to do it. This culture isn't teaching you how to do it. So make the investment to learn relational technology and more skilled behavior will get you more of what you want. It works better.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's such a great, important message that relationship is the connection we seek in all dimensions, and certainly with our intimate others, friends, and partners. It's what we long for. We're social animals, and this is uh, a great gift that you've spent the time and your energy and really brought all your brilliance to this uh, real practical gifts and tools to share with others. So thank you, Terry, very much. Great to have
And
you.
then lastly, we also we do our spiritual practices through our adaptive
Yeah,
child.
yeah, yes,
So the same sorts of rigidity, shortfalls that we bring to our relationship to people, we bring to our relationship to spirit as well. So it's all one thing.
yeah, beautiful. So you can do these peer inquiries by listening to me ask the questions, or you can read them from the book or ask another person to ask you the questions and then switch. When you do this peer inquiry with another person, to begin, decide who's going to ask or read the questions first and who's going to answer first. The person asking will read the first question, wait for a response, then ask the second question and wait for a response. Then the reader will go back to the first question and repeat the series of inquiries one more time. Then switch roles. When you are asked the question, first, understand it, then unhook local awareness from thinking and allow awareness to look or feel back directly. Let words arise and speak from where you are. When awareness drops below the neck and opens, what does this open-hearted awareness know? What does the welcoming heart know? Is this awake awareness an experience occurring to you? Or is this who you are? What is the relationship between awareness and any unpleasant feelings? What is the relationship between awareness and beliefs and stories? What is the relationship between awareness and the fear of death? Enjoy. Thanks for listening. This podcast is offered freely. And if you've enjoyed this, please download a free trial of our new app at mindfulglimpses.com. There we offer daily micro meditations and in-depth programs to support your awakening.